Hello, and welcome to the analysis phase of the system development lifecycle. Okay, now that we got through the planning phase, which basically stated it's a good idea and we have a decent understanding of what they're being asking us to do, and it's feasible, so we move forward to the analysis phase. To me, the analysis phase is the most important phase of the entire system development lifecycle. It's one that basically says, what is it you want us to do? The details of what you want us to do. We need to collect those details. By understanding those details, we can develop a system that is correct and it's right. A lot of people ignore this phase, and it really does, subject itself to failure a little bit later on. To me, this is the phase. You must know what it is you're going to be doing for your customer. This phase is probably the hardest of all the phases. Why? Because you're dealing with people. People have a hard time understanding exactly what it is that you want. So it's our job as the analyst at this point in time to truly be empathetical toward those people, those customers, and make sure we're the ones asking the right questions, making sure we're the ones getting deeper. We must understand that our customers are usually doing a different job, totally different than IT development. So with that said, we cannot expect them to know exactly what it is we need to know. All right? So that's what this phase is all about. The objectives is that we're going to talk about what the analysis phase is. We're going to talk about how to collect, what to collect during the analysis phase. We're going to talk about how to collect the information needed. And then finally, we're going to talk about how to model what you have. Okay? We'll talk about each one of these as we kind of get into it. The analysis phase is where complete understanding of the proposed project and the business requirements are gathered, modeled, and understood. The main activities of this phase are really threefold: the requirements gathering themselves, the modeling of this information, and then also, finally, the determination of development strategies, meaning some solutions and then a final recommendation. That's what this phase is. As you can see, that's a pretty big phase because we're going to come up with a solution now. And not only the solution, we're probably going to come up with some type of cost for that solution. So we must know exactly what it is we're going to be doing. How could we ever come up with a solution if we don't? As we practiced in previous weeks of the course, this is where your analysis skills come into play. You'll be able to identify the problem, evaluate the key elements or root causes of the problem, then develop a useful solution of the problem. So if you recall a few weeks ago, we kind of did some analysis against a core set of problems, more community problems, social problems, something you're probably more aware of. We wanted you to take that opportunity to kind of learn that that's what analysis is all about. And for the most part, everybody did a really great job on that. You understood what the problem was, you drilled down into the problem, you found what the root causes were. Based upon those root causes, you came to conclusions on how to solve those problems, and finally with a recommendation. It's no different what we're going to be doing now in this phase. That's exactly what we're going to be doing. Okay? Does that make sense? That's kind of why we did that little example way back when, to allow you the opportunity to practice this and relate to something you already are aware of. It must be noted that the model or the technique, when I say model and technique, I think I called it methodologies before, but the agile, waterfall, those types of things, that there's different models that are used in the SDLC. Each one of those deals with these things a little bit differently. When I say these things, these phases very differently. All right. So once again, we'll review that a little bit later on, but for the most part, I just want you to be aware that we're going to talk about it in general right now, and then later on, we'll get into more details on how each of those models treat these phases differently. So requirements gathering, the first of those 3 points that I had in regards to what makes up the analysis phase. Gathering requirements is a skill where you will build that skill as you gain more experience. Okay, I don't know if that's a great sentence or not, but we'll stick with it. Basically what I'm saying here is that very few people come out of college being a great analyst. I'm hoping that I give you the baseline skills, or at least the baseline to become, start working in this field or start working as an analyst. But your analytical skills improve with experience. There's no doubt about it, because every experience becomes now part of your library that you refer back to, if you will, um, that can have you ask more questions. The more times you spend in different businesses, the more times you learn about business, the more times you understand the different types of business. And then basically, as you walk through all those things, each and every time, you become better and better and better at the requirements. Once you see, the results of a project based upon how you gather requirements before, the good, the bad, and the ugly possibly of all that. That's experience that then you'll go to the next one and fix the things that you realize that you didn't gather before. So the goal here is experience, experience, experience. So don't be too impatient with this. It comes in time. I hope the goal would be is that you get opportunities to be part of this when you first start working, and then in the end you'll start gaining more and more experience as you go through it. Requirements gathering to me is in four parts. I'm not quite sure I would say that the four parts are in any particular type of order, but there's something I'm doing as I'm going through the requirements gathering. Number one, I want to understand and seek the root causes of the problem or opportunity. I want to make sure I walk through my systems requirement checklist. I want to make sure that I'm understanding the current process that we're trying to automate. And I also want to ask questions around if the current process is the right process or not. Okay, we'll talk about each one of those in more detail. So when we talk about understanding and seeking the root causes of the problem or opportunity, this is where you use your analytical skills and keep asking, but why? Okay, we talked about that before. We'll talk about it here a little bit more later on. We want to drill down into it because you never know what could be revealed as you're drilling down and you're asking questions. Again, it's might not be the very first thing you're doing, but you're doing it as you're collecting requirements. You constantly want to be asking, but why? But why? To drill down a little bit further. We'll talk about that here a little bit more. And in doing so, it should reveal, it could reveal something that could completely alter the project. All right? Is that a good thing at this point in time? It's a very good thing right now. What we don't want to do is reveal something after the project's been implemented, and all of a sudden we realize it was completely wrong, and tons of money has been spent, and tons of time has been spent. We want to understand it now. That's what this phase is all about. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some things out there, or most things out there, I should say, are very straightforward. There's not much you're going to really dig up, but there's times where you can dig some things up. One of the best examples I have from my career is I did some consulting work for a company that was a tier one supplier of bicycle parts for Huffy Bicycle. I'm not sure if everybody here has heard of Huffy before. I believe it's still out there. They were the tier one supplier. Huffy was a United States company that actually packed up and moved to China. Once it did that, this company was no longer the tier one supplier for it. Matter of fact, it was not the supplier for it at all. They completely lost that business. Unfortunately, their company made up 90% of that business. With that said, they were really panicked. They called me up, asked me to come down, meet them for lunch, and I did. I went down there, and basically what they asked me to do, and again, we're in the planning phase now, right, is to help them sell their bicycle parts online. They wanted to be able to put all their bicycle parts online, specifically baskets, pedals, things that people would actually buy themselves, not so much parts that Huffy would need, but parts that a person at home may need for replacement. I went, oh, okay, that's interesting. And so I kept, we got past the planning and we started asking some questions. We really didn't get past the planning too much, but we started asking some questions, but why? Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to do this? And they got further and further deeper, and we started realizing they were completely panicked. They had no idea what else to do to try to save their company. Their company was 50 years old, and that company, employed quite a few people in the area. They were panicked. They didn't know what to do. But we started asking the question, going back, can I see your business plan? What is it you're trying to do? Well, they didn't have a business plan. Once Huffy had left, the business plan went kaput. And so right now they were just scrambling. In the end, because we kept asking the but whys, we got down to that this isn't really what you want to be doing as your business. They weren't set up for this. And I'm not sure it was a viable business for what they wanted to do. With that said, we helped them develop their business plan in the end. And now what they are is a tier one supplier to automotive for automotive parts, and they're doing quite well. This particular experience I had was about 20 years ago, and they're very much in existence today, doing very, very well. If I just would have just created a website for them, I am almost sure that in the end, they may not have been in business today. I don't want to take all the accolades for saving their company, but I guess what I'm saying here is that we need to understand the root causes of the problem in some cases. All right? The system requirements checklist. So one of the big things we're trying to do during this phase is to make sure we understand exactly what is being asked of us. The great place to start is what are the outputs? What is it they want out of this system? A lot of cases, by understanding what they want out of this system, we can understand what needs to go into the process, what goes into the system, the inputs. Meaning, if they ask me for an output, then I want to know every every female's favorite, I don't know, product, who's under and who every female under the age of 18's favorite product that we sell. Well, if that's the case, if I'm collecting customer information, I need to make sure that I collect date of birth and I collect gender, or I can never provide them to them. So sometimes starting off with the end in mind is the best way of starting with these things. In addition, we also want to know what are the inputs, what's coming in, what are they gather right now, what is it they actually want to be able to store and have information on. We need to talk about performance considerations, meaning how does the system need to be up 24/7? What's going, those types of things. And then finally, security. How secure should the system be? How important is the data, or how, can the data, what would happen if the data was compromised? So we need to understand all those things to make sure we take care of those as part of our requirements, and we take care of those as part of our architecture of our system. Once we kind of have the inputs and the outputs in that, one of the big things that we're doing at the same time is really starting to ask the questions of what is the process? So we get these inputs and then we want these outputs. So every process for the most part is just like a cooking something where you have ingredients, you have a process, and then there's outputs. That process is exactly what it is we automate. That's what we program. So our job is to understand their manual process today. And by doing so, we can hopefully develop a system that completely fits what they do today. We don't want to change their processes so much, okay? We want to adhere to their process. And so there's very minimal change to how they do the work they do today. Minimal change equates to, happier customers, happier users of the system. So what we basically do is I go in and I start asking the first thing. Okay, you get this information, you get this data. What's the first thing you do? What's the second thing you do? What's the third thing you do? I might throw in some but whys to drill down, because you never know what might come of that. But my ultimate goal is to really understand what they do. I do this by usually asking open-ended questions. What's the first thing you do? Open-ended versus closed-ended. Like, do you do this? And they say yes. I want to know more information. We want to gather as much as we possibly can to completely understand what it is they're doing. Once again, this is the meat of it. This is the part. These are our requirements. This is exactly what it is we're going to be programming. They might say, well, if I do this, if this comes in like this, I do this, or else I would do this. Well, those are conditional statements now that are part of our program. Does that make sense? Every once in a while, though, you'll go into some place and you need to make sure that the process that you've been doing at this point in time is actually the right process. What do I mean by that? Well, a lot of cases, many times people have been doing the same thing the same way for many, many, many years. They don't have time to figure out if it's the best way. But what we really want to do is make sure whatever we automate is the best process possible. I've been involved with a couple of situations where I've gone in and we started there. We asked the question, what is the process that you hear to today? And then we basically spent a lot of time talking about how should we do it? Now that we've been doing it like this forever, let's step back for a second and say, is there a better way? The goal in any kind of process is to eliminate any kind of handoffs that we can. We can't eliminate them all, but a handoff is an opportunity for an error. So what we want to do is eliminate handoffs. Meaning I take this piece of paper, I do something with it, and hand it off to somebody else, and they do something with it. Hand it off to somebody else, they do something with it. We don't want that, and we want to minimize those as much as possible. So what we usually do is we'll go in and we'll start talking about the process to see what we can do to help them understand a better way of going about their process. Or we ask the question, if you could change how you're doing, what would you do? Is there a better way now that you've been doing it this way for a long time? Can you step back and remove yourself from how you do it today and figure out a better way? Or is there a better way? And you'll be surprised at the answers. 9 times out of 10, there's always, well, yeah, there's a better way. I wish we could do it this way. I wish we could do it that way. We want to capture that. We want to automate that. That's what we want to automate, a good process, not a bad one. How do we collect this? Very similar to the planning phase, just with much more detail. Again, the planning phase, we're asking questions around, is this feasible or not? And so, will you do this? Will you do that? Will you train your people? Does your boss agree to this? Do you have the technology to support what you're doing? That's the planning phase. In this phase, we're going to go back to those interviews. We still need to understand exactly who it is we're going to be interviewing. We need to get ready for those interviews, set up some questions already to get going with the interviews, and so on. We may have to survey. We still might need to observe. We want to collect any kind of forms and so that they may be using today, any kind of paper forms that they use for inputs or outputs or whatever. We want to collect all that information. We want to get down to the individual pieces of data when we collect our requirements. It's very detailed, and in some cases, it can be very tedious. But again, it's the basis of doing this well and doing this right the first time. That's what the SDLC is all about, correct? So, same type of things, just with a lot more detail. The questions are going to be totally different than they were in the planning phase. I hope you understand that. Once you have all this data, what we usually do is we model it, okay? I could talk for hours on how to model, but that's not what the goal here right now is. But what modeling is that we're going to collect all this information from the requirements. We're going to go back to our office and we're going to disseminate. We're going to break it down. We're going to see what we have. There's been times when I have collected requirements. Next thing I know, I almost have a book of notes, or I have a bunch of audio recordings of people talking. I need to break it down to truly understand what I have and what I don't have. And to do this, we usually illustrate it. There's a lot of different ways of doing this, okay? There's from data flow diagrams to just different types of way of diagramming what you have. Usually, we try to put them in pictures or flow it somehow so we completely understand a little bit about what we have and what we don't have. The goal is to illustrate the processes and the data flow between those processes. I mean, we actually put in the data, what's going from here to here, and so on. This is what we want to automate. The goal of this particular modeling piece, though, is to make sure we completely understand the processes and to make sure that we're complete. We may start disseminating and realize we have a gap in there. That's a great thing to find at this point in time. And then we can go back to our customer and say, I'm not sure I understand this, or maybe it looks like I'm missing something. So with that said, that's what we're trying to do here, and that's what modeling is all about. All right? So we take all these words and we break it down and make pictures. And by pictures, hopefully it spells it out a little more cleaner for us, that we can understand what we have and what we don't have and so on. Remember, if a picture paints 1,000 words, right? I don't know if you ever heard that before. It's some poem somewhere. Anyway, with that said, it does. And so that's what modeling is all about. All right. So as I stated before, I believe this is the most important phase of the SDLC. Is it the sexiest phase, the most fun phase? And not necessarily. But it's a phase that's required to do things really well. I actually enjoy it the most. I love getting deep into the requirements and truly understanding what it is they want to get out, and truly understanding all the but whys that maybe I can find something that really it's not quite there that we can actually bring from, and then all of a sudden you alter what you're doing. But in the end, you end up doing something much more special than you ever thought you could do before. I love that part of it. But if you don't spend the time ensuring that you have a complete and accurate set of requirements, then it is impossible to be successful. Once you feel you have completed this phase, it's time to determine solutions and a final recommendation for a solution. And we're going to talk about that in our next video.